Vegas is constantly changing. New casinos are torn down and newer ones take their places. Road work and detours are a constant state of being. One thing that never changes is the dry, hot air, the feel of home. I stepped out of the coolness of the airport and into the early afternoon sauna that is Vegas in July. As hot as it was, it would get hotter still. Had it been 5 or 6 years since I'd been back. Call me Dizzy, short for Izzy, which is short for Ignacio, my grandfather's name. My full name is Ignacio Elizondo Johnson. No matter where I went, the kids always called me Dizzy. I go by Dizzy Johnson now. Before you ask, my dad, Lawrence Elizondo, was Basque. For those of you who failed geography, that's a little region in the north of Spain. I'm 22, was so fed up with school that, though I meant to go to college, I couldn't bring myself to. I build and rebuild motorcycles and engines for Swain Johnson. You might have heard of him. He is pretty famous with the NASCAR circuit. I'm on his pit crew and one of his personal mechanics. Few people paid attention when Swain married my mom. Now he is a national racing star, as well as my stepdad. I had come back to Vegas for 2 reasons. My best friend from high school, the man I once had a crush on, the man I had wished I could have told that I was gay, was about to get married to a woman named Jenny. Crashing their wedding was the first reason I had come to Vegas. I had had 2 serious relationships and a handful of flings since I'd left. But because of my constant traveling, none of them lasted. They were fun at the time, though. None of us have any regrets, and sometimes we text each other to see how each other's life is. Or, if we happen to be in the same town, and we're both single, a casual weekend hookup. But they were nothing compared to the feelings I had had for Caleb Green. He'd never even known I'd liked him like that. We'd lost touch right after my real dad, Lawrence, died. Hit by a drunk driver while walking to the corner store, and me and Mom moved to Florida to live with my aunt. I was 16 at the time. While we lived in Miami, my mom met a guy, Swain Johnson, and eventually married him. Swain adopted me when they got married. I had barely turned 18 at the time. Soon after, my stepdad, which I simply call Dad now, won his first race at the Talladega Superspeedway, the racetrack in Lincoln, Alabama. He's won a bunch of races since then, and is considered one of the top 10 racers in the United States. There were 2 reasons I was in Vegas right now. Reconnecting with Caleb was one. Dad's Sunday race at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway was the other one. I had ordered a rental, a black Toyota Avalon, while I was waiting at the luggage carousel, and the car waited for me out front. Should I go see Caleb first, or get a hotel? I can't wait to see Caleb. Would he even remember me? It was late afternoon. I followed my phone's directions to Caleb's old house. Besides, this is Vegas. Anyone can find a hotel room any time of the day or night. So what's the rush? Vegas hadn't changed, and it had changed, both at the same time. I thought I remembered the streets, but it was a good thing I had my phone to guide me. About a half an hour later, I pulled into the familiar subdivision. After a left turn, I arrived at Collins Street. 3 houses down was the Greens' place. I couldn't believe how excited I was. A 2-story terracotta stucco home with a red-tiled roof, a 2-car garage, and a small rock garden for a front yard. Instead of steps, the front door now had a ramp. That was new. Only 1 car was parked in the drive, though it had room for 2. A quick look inside confirmed my suspicions. The car had a couple of extra gadgets, including a hand-controlled speed lever. Marge must have gotten worse. A white car and a red truck were parked in front of the house. All the cars had handicap stickers in the windows. I didn't recognize the car in the drive, an older model silver Mercury Sable, which I assumed was Marge's, but I knew that truck. It was an old, red, beat-up F-150 Ford truck, hood open, and rap music swearing away from its tinny speaker system. That truck was older than me. Was Caleb, Emmerson, and their dad still working on that old thing? A labor of love, as well as a money pit. I had learned how to change spark plugs and rebuild engines on that old truck, and I have helped change its oil at least 6 times, if not more. A thunk came from underneath the engine, and somebody swore. "Damn it, Dad, why do you have to screw the oil pan bolt so tight?" A muffled voice came from under the truck. A pair of muscular, hairy legs stuck out from under the engine. Somebody must be changing the oil right now. Was it Caleb? "Sure you got the right size wrench? You always did underestimate the size," a voice came from the garage. I walked over, knelt, looked at the tools on the sidewalk, picked one, and handed it under the truck to the man lying underneath. I simply said, "Is this one big enough to handle?" "Thanks, Dad," the voice under the truck said. Grinning, I said, "I'm not your daddy. Do you want me to take a look?" "Not my dad," the voice said in surprise. "Well, I'll be," the voice from the garage said. "Dizzy, is that you? Marge, get out here. You won't believe who's back in Vegas." Caleb's dad, Phil Green, came out of the garage, a balding, middle-aged man carrying an extra 30 pounds and wearing faded jeans and an oil-stained wife-beater and a smile as big as Vegas. It's good to know nothing had changed. "Dizzy?" The man under the truck scooted out in a flash, an oil smear on his face and on his wife-beater and on his chin, and he was sporting a smile. The sudden movement skirted his wife-beater up a little, revealing very nice, very hairy abs. A beefy hunk of a man, he had shaggy light brown hair, several days' beard growth, and beautiful blue eyes. He also wore faded Levi's, though his also sported several holes. The resemblance between father and son didn't stop there. Both were big men, and both were hairy bears that didn't scrimp on their solid muscles. Old middle age had given Phil a bit of a punch and had made his physique a little softer. The man that emerged from under the truck didn't have that issue. Strong arms and a wide chest that his wife-beater could barely contain, and even wider shoulders. He was a hairy bear of a man, and on him it dripped pure sexiness. It wasn't Caleb, but his younger brother, Emmerson. I'd last seen him when he was a scrawny 15-year-old who was just starting to shave, but the man he turned into could drive me wild. Somebody had grown into something husky and fierce. Some things had changed for the better. Phil gripped me in a bear hug, and then Emmerson did likewise. 2 seconds later, Marge Green wheeled out the front door in a compact wheelchair, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Completely opposite Phil and Emmerson, she was a slight figure with a ready smile. Except for a few more gray hairs, she looked just like I remembered. Marge had scattered blonde hair and arms prepared to hug at a moment's notice, and someday I'd have to ask her why she always wore blue eyeshadow. Marge had been like a second mom to me, and I was here when I heard my dad had died. I'd bawled like an infant on her shoulder. Her shiny silver wheelchair surprised me. Marge had gotten worse. She wheeled down the ramp and over to me. I knelt, and she held me by the shoulders, looking me up and down. "I heard your mom remarried," she said. "Has she been feeding you?" "Definitely not enough. You're staying for dinner. We're having pot roast, and I'm making sure you get double portions." "When it comes to food," Emmerson whispered, "we've learned never to argue with Mom." "The wheelchair? What happened?" I asked. "You remember the minor deterioration in Mom's lower vertebrae?" Emmerson said. "It's not minor anymore. Think of it like paralysis, but with feeling." "I'm sorry," I said. Marge put her hands on her hips. Fire flashed in her eyes, and she said, "Dizzy Elizondo, don't you dare feel sorry for me." "Dizzy Johnson," I corrected. I took my stepdad's name. "You would have thought that being in a wheelchair would have slowed Mom down," Emmerson said. "We can't keep up with her now," Phil teased, leaned down, and kissed his wife's forehead. Marge was about to hug me, but she looked at my shirt instead. Then she glared at Phil and Emmerson. Lord almighty, which one of you got oil on his pretty shirt? Dizzy is not even here 2 minutes, and he's already dirty. Dizzy, give me that shirt so I can soak it and wash it, and Emmerson, Patrick, Green, march into your closet and find our guest something to wear. Yes, Mom, Emmerson said. In spite of the wheelchair, Marge hadn't changed. I removed the light yellow button-down and handed it to her. Emerson's eyes flickered up and down my naked chest, appreciatively examining the hardware. Running around with Dad's pit crew kept me in shape. With a lingering glance like that, I'd lay odds Emmerson was gay. I think Phil noticed the way Emmerson looked at me, smiled, and then he said, Dizzy, hope you like Bud Light Lime because that's all Marge will allow in the house. Marge took my shirt, frowned at the oil stain, and said, Doctor said Phil needs to lose a few pounds. Bud Light Lime is fine, I said, standing up. Dinner's in an hour, Marge said. Emmerson, as soon as you find a shirt for Dizzy, you two shuck 10 ears of corn and put them on the grill. Don't forget to butter them first and spice them up with some Old Bay seasoning. Yes, Mom, Emmerson said. Where's Caleb? I asked. Phil, Marge, and Emmerson suddenly paused, and Phil's smile disappeared. Out with it. Tell me what happened, I asked. Word is he's getting married this weekend. Already done, Phil said. Ran off to Hawaii with his new family and left us behind. We embarrass him, Emmerson muttered. What? You're the best mechanics in Nevada, and Marge is the best cook. Why? I asked. Marge wheeled up the ramp and said, Dinner first. Emmerson, how many times do I have to tell you to take Dizzy back to your room and find him a shirt? Dizzy, I noticed your suitcase is in your back seat. We have an extra bed. Stay with us. I'll be in Vegas for nearly 10 days. I don't want to impose, I said. Nonsense, Phil said. You're family, and besides, Caleb hasn't stayed here in years. I'll put fresh sheets on the bed immediately, Marge said. Emmerson suddenly dashed past us, yelling, Wait a second, Mom. I need a minute to clean up the room. Boys and their cars, Marge muttered, and gave me another quick hug. It's good to have you back in Nevada, Dizzy. I had to smile. Thank God some things never change. But the house had. Everything was now wheelchair accessible, including kitchen counters and bathroom counters, and there were wide pathways for the wheelchair. Only things that were absolutely necessary were on the floor. They'd also torn down a wall to make a bigger, wheelchair-accessible master bedroom, and a bigger, wheelchair-friendly bathroom. The house had handrails on every wall, and even the doors had flat-handled doorknobs, making it easier for the wheelchair user to open and close them. I followed Emmerson back to the room he once shared with Caleb, a pretty traditional room with 2 beds, 2 desks, a large closet, and a door in the bathroom. Painted a sunny beige, it looked like a dorm room with posters of cars and movies and a couple of hot actors. Clothes hung everywhere. Old soda cans and Bud Light bottles littered the desks, not to mention lots of old car parts, but the floor was clear. It took Emmerson a few minutes to clear Caleb's old bed. I helped, and we got to talking. He found me an old black Meatheads band shirt, but it was a bit big for me. Marge rolled into our room carrying fresh sheets and said, Start shucking the corn, boys. Dinner is almost ready. Even confined to a wheelchair, Marge replaced the sheets and spruced the bed into something tidy in only 2 minutes. By herself. Mom, when does Caleb get back from his honeymoon? Emmerson asked, flopping down on his bed. Not until Friday, she said. Emmerson, Patrick, Green, are you still wearing that oil-stained wife-beater and you're laying on your bed? I didn't raise no heathen. Get out of that shirt right now. Yes, Mom, Emmerson said, jumping off the bed. Emmerson stripped out of the wife-beater, tossed it into a full hamper, and opened the closet door. Emmerson Patrick Green was just as sexy and hairy as any guy I had ever lusted after. I sat on Caleb's old bed, feeling the blood pump in my veins. Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. Definitely Oh my. He found a button-down beige shirt that did nothing to hide his biceps or triceps or shoulders. And I was sleeping in the same room with this guy? I wasn't going to get much sleep. I sat on Caleb's old bed and said, Caleb's Facebook said his service was Saturday. That's the Vegas reception, Marge said. But a little sourness tainted her voice. We'll tell you all about it, Emmerson said, but there was something bitter in his voice as well. I glanced at Marge, and though her smile was genuine, pain flickered across her eyes. What had happened? Emmerson, bring your laptop to dinner, Marge said. We'll show Dizzy the pictures. Hurry, boys, that corn won't shuck itself. Was it my imagination, or had Marge's voice hinted of some trouble? Emmerson and I washed up, shucked the corn, buttered the corn, seasoned the corn, placed it on the barbecue, and went into the dining room. Phil politely wheeled Marge's wheelchair up to the table. Emmerson set his laptop up, plugged in the family router, and while his system warmed up, he set a pot roast with honey-glazed carrots and new red potatoes on the table. Phil, still wearing the oil-stained wife-beater, went out and brought back a tray containing the barbecued corn. Of course there were Bud Light limes for all of us. This is a feast, I said. Can I give you some money or something? Marge giggled and said, It's nice to have the company. Then let me take you out to dinner before I leave, I said. That sounds too much like a date, Marge said. Maybe the parents should sit this one out and give the boys some time alone. Mom, Emmerson hissed. You better be careful, Phil chuckled. I bet Emmerson won't be able to keep his hands to himself. Dad, Emmerson quickly hissed. Unless our gaydar is wrong. 2 gay guys in one room, Marge teased. Will the house survive? Mom, Emmerson hissed. Wait, Dizzy, you're gay? Yep, I said. I came out years ago. I'll have to tell you that story later. Emmerson, does that mean you're gay too? It's all Mom and Dad wants to talk about, Emmerson said. That's because, Marge said, we want you to find a nice boy. You shouldn't have to take care of your mom all the time. That's another thing Caleb said when he left, Phil muttered. How dare we expect him to pay for Marge's medical bills? That line was a conversation killer. To get things restarted, I asked, What's the story with Caleb? As we ate, Marge knew how to cook. The story of Caleb's romance unfolded. Caleb had met Jenny Marston when he was 19 and she was 18. They dated, fell in love. However, Caleb had never brought her over to visit his parents. Caleb was in full no-contact mode. Caleb speedily graduated in finance and moved in with Jenny. It wasn't long before he became one of the employees at the Marston brokerage and began raking in the money. By the time Marge, Phil, and Emmerson realized that Caleb was getting married, little things like the bachelor party had already happened. The traditional get-togethers so in-laws could get to know each other had not happened. Everything Phil and Marge learned about the wedding, they learned from Caleb's Facebook. The next they knew, Caleb and Jenny had gone to Hawaii for a special service in a remote chapel that overlooked Mauna Loa, an active volcano in Hawaii. Caleb never told his family. Let me get this right, I said. 2 kids from Vegas got married in Hawaii and honeymooned in front of a volcano? Who can afford that? The Marston family, Phil said. The happy couple had posted a dozen pictures of themselves at their wedding luau and at various locations around Hawaii. When did Caleb get so rich? I asked. We're the same age, aren't we? After looking at each other, Marge answered. He interned at Marston Brokerage and then was hired. That's how he met Jenny Marston. They have more money than God. So what is Saturday? I asked. A black tie reception for everybody who didn't go to Hawaii, Emmerson said. He got up from the table and walked outside. Confused, I almost stood, but Marge placed her hand on mine. Give him a minute, Dizzy. He feels left out. We all do. Caleb didn't invite any of us. Why is Caleb acting like this? I asked. Phil was the one who answered. Caleb thinks we robbed him. Why? I asked. We'd saved up almost 50 grand for Caleb's and Emmerson's college, Marge said. But life took a left turn. My spine worsened, and I was hospitalized. We had to spend their college money on my hospital stay and medications, and then remodel the house to be wheelchair accessible so I could come home. We still had to take out a loan to finish the house, Phil said. But Caleb resents us. He had to arrange his own set of loans so he could go to college. Emmerson leaned against the doorway, arms folded, and said, My brother hates us because Dad had to pay a fortune to the hospital and for rehabilitation therapy, all the things insurance wouldn't cover. We went broke, Phil said. I thought for a moment, still confused. Caleb hates you because Marge had to go to the hospital? Last thing he said, Phil said. We ruined his life. He won't talk to us. We don't even know where he lives. Marge offered a small smile and asked, Dizzy, why don't you tell us about you and your mom and your stepdad? How do you guys get along? Sven and I had issues, at first, I said. Let me be clear. After Dad died, we had to move across country to my aunt's place in Miami. Mom got a job at an auto parts store, and since she was lonely, she started dating one of the customers, Sven Johnson. I was in a brand new high school with brand new kids and brand new rules and didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends, and I was always angry, and I had nightmares. Mom wanted to get me a counselor, but she couldn't afford one. Sven stepped up. He knew I liked working on cars, and he said he needed help with his car. Turns out that the car we worked on became the original 555. 555? Phil asked. Dad's first racing car, I said. A Mustang GT that we customized. Dad later used it to win the Speedway at Talladega and used it to qualify for his first NASCAR race. The rest is history. Wow, Phil said. I know somebody famous. I looked out the window and found myself looking back at those days. It took only a few key clicks, and I brought a picture of the original 555 up on the screen, with a younger me, my dad, and my mom standing next to it. And I said, Dad and I must have rebuilt that engine at least twice, but the coolant system never worked right no matter what we did. But somehow we kept that thing running. Dad and I talked for hours while we worked on that car. He let a crazy, mixed-up, angry teenager talk. I will always owe him. We became best friends, and later he became my dad. I came out to him first. How did that go? Emmerson asked. The three of us went out to dinner, I said, and Mom kept pointing out cute guys and dared me to talk to them. They don't have a problem with me being attracted to guys. Marge squinted at the picture and pointed at the car door. Is that why there's a pride flag on the driver's side door? Dad's way to show that he's proud of me, I said. You're gay, or bi, or pan, ace maybe? Phil asked. I noticed the quick look he gave to Marge, but didn't make an issue of it. Gay, I said. I wanted to tell Caleb, but I was too scared. With Dad's death, I had trouble dealing with life, let alone coming out. My dad helped me with that. Am I confusing you? Not at all, Marge said, and gave her husband an odd smile. But she turned to me and said, How long has Sven and your mom been married? Almost 4 years. Sven even adopted me, I said. I'm part of Dad's pit crew because he wanted someone he could trust. Dad even pays me the going rate, and I have my own place just outside Miami. NASCAR-trained pit crew mechanics make some serious money, Emmerson said. The experienced ones make 6 digits, I said, but I don't have the years they do. I'm only in the high 5 digits. Don't think it's easy. We earn it. Including the original 555. Dad owns 3 versions of the 555, and it's our job to keep them all running. Whether he's racing or not, we have a lot to do. Next time you watch a race, pay attention to the pit crew. You have 15 to 20 seconds to change tires, refuel the car, all while cars are speeding past you at a couple 100 miles an hour. If they make one wrong miscalculation, they and their car will plow through the barricades, and you're dead. I've learned 2 things. Duct tape is your best friend, and we earn our combat pay. "What's the fastest you've changed a tire?" Phil asked. "About 10 seconds, I said. Dad was behind in a race, and seconds mattered. "Do you want to see the new 555? I swung the laptop around and typed in Dad's name and 555. The latest 555 was a blue Ford Mustang GT, covered in sponsor stickers with a gay pride flag on the driver's side door. The numbers 555 were on the hood and on each door, as well as on the roof. Dad stood next to the car, all decked out in his white padded uniform, minus the helmet. Mom stood on his right, dressed in jeans and a comfortable blouse. I, dressed in the orange jumpsuit of the pit crew, stood on his left. Dad's arms were around our shoulders. Just to my left was the pride flag on the door. This was just before the qualifier in January, I said. "Nice car," Emmerson said, but the way he looked at me made me think he meant me instead. "Have you ever gotten to drive the 555? Phil asked. "Drive, many times," I said. "Race? Never. Dad has nerves of titanium steel, and what he does scares me." Just like when I was a teen, I helped clean up the dishes and the kitchen. I sat on their porch, staring as the high, wispy clouds stained the sky. Quickly, I called Mom and Dad and let them know I had arrived all right. Dad had just left Miami with the trailers, one of which hauled the latest 555, and one hauled the original 555. It was going into a special display at the Vegas Motor Speedway for this weekend's race. Dad and Mom could fly here. It would be faster, but Dad preferred to stay with the 555. They'd be here Thursday, give or take. Life had changed. I had come here to crash the wedding of an old friend, but he had already married. The times we'd shared together would always be special. After all, Caleb, even if he didn't realize it, had been the guy I wanted to be my first boyfriend. I guess marrying Jenny was what he really wanted. Since I'm here, and visiting Caleb is a bust, it's time to look some people up. I yelled into Marge, Phil, and Emmerson that I was going to check on some old friends. "Want some company?" Emmerson asked. "Sure," I said, suddenly glad to have this handsome cub next to me. Turns out that one of my old friends had moved, but another had married and had a kid on the way. It was fun reconnecting with him. He was a fan of my dad, never realizing that it was my dad. I promised to send him an autographed picture. Emmerson and I somehow clicked, maybe because we had so much in common. It didn't matter what was happening. Almost every moment was a party with him. Emmerson toured with me around Vegas, visiting all the places I remembered and catching up with a lot of people. He was 21 to my 22 and was incredibly sexy. That night, we stripped and changed. Emmerson to an old t-shirt and cut-off sweatpants, me to old gym shorts and a tank, and went to our separate beds and talked for a little while. The nightmare began around midnight. I was searching for something and being chased at the same time. If I didn't find whatever it was, that thing would catch me. I sat up, breathing heavy, orientating myself to the unfamiliar room. I hadn't had a nightmare for months. "You okay?" Emmerson asked. "Sorry," I said, still gasping for air. "Nightmare." "Do you want to talk about it?" Emmerson asked. "When Dad died and we moved, I had trouble adjusting," I said, my voice trailing off. "Sleeping in new places can trigger it." "I think any kid would have trouble adjusting to what happened to you," Emmerson said. "I'm fine now," I said, and we went back to our beds. An hour later, I bolted upright, terrified, but couldn't remember the dream. I think my dad had been in it, and I had been driving. "Bad?" Emmerson said, getting out of bed and sitting beside me. He placed an arm about my shoulders. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sorry about this." In the darkness, Emerson's eyes were dark shadows, but I sensed the concern. He said, "When Mom realized she couldn't walk anymore, she had nightmares. Even in the hospital, Dad slept with her so she would know she wasn't alone. I know we're not close, but I don't mind sleeping next to you." "Are you trying to get frisky?" I mumbled. "No," he said. "Most guys I've dated wonder why we don't jump into bed on the first or second date. I move too slow for them." I gave a little chuckle and said, "Are you trying to tell me my virtue is safe? Too bad." "I like to get to know people first," he said. We snuggled down in my bed, blanket pulled loosely around us, and we quietly whispered a little before falling asleep. I woke up, breathing hard. Something had been chasing me. "Relax," Emmerson said, his mouth only inches away. "You're safe." I reached over and took hold of his hand. We woke a little past 6, snuggling, cuddling. Emmerson was the big spoon, keeping me safe. Tuesday night, we had stopped off at a familiar haunt, Mildred's Diner, and we were in a booth when I asked, "Doesn't Caleb understand what's happening to your mom?" For a second, I thought my question had gone too far, but Emmerson leaned forward, sipped his coffee, and said, "Caleb had his life all planned out. Then Mom got sicker. We went from living comfortable to broke in 2 months." I sipped my coffee, waiting for Emmerson to explain, and finally Emmerson said, "He sees us as nothing but dirty, low-life mechanics who stole his future." "I don't understand the problem," I said. "Cars are my life, and yours, and Marge needed big-time, expensive help." "We don't fit in with Caleb's plans," Emmerson said. "He's a stockbroker making tons of money, while our family... Well, don't tell my folks I said this, but Dad is still repaying the loan for getting the house remodeled for Mom's wheelchair. If I have extra cash, I try and help." "Caleb doesn't like your family because you're mechanics and your mom is in a wheelchair?" I said. I switched seats so I could sit next to Emmerson. Emmerson slightly nodded, looked down at his hands, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "He's ashamed of us. Of me. Caleb was Mom and Dad's favorite. He got good grades, was going to be rich, but all I wanted to do was work with cars. I don't think he liked it when I came out." I quickly took the big man's hand and held it. Emmerson took a long, slow breath and looked at me, a longing in his eyes. I guess I'm a sucker for somebody in pain. Maybe I'm falling for this guy. Slowly, hesitantly, I drew in close and lightly kissed him on the lips. A nice, chaste, safe, sterile, not sexy, but beautiful kiss. Emmerson closed his eyes, savoring the moment. I swiftly changed the subject and asked, "When did you realize you were gay?" Emmerson rewarded me with a soft chuckle, and he said, "When I was 10 or 12, but I couldn't talk about it for the longest time. You didn't know this, but I'd crushed on you years ago. But then your dad died, and you left. You'd been gone a couple of years when I worked up the courage to tell my family. I think I had just turned 17. Dad had this odd look on his face, but he said, 'Does that mean we need to paint a rainbow somewhere?' Mom simply said, 'Honey, check the internet. Is red at the top of the rainbow, or is it purple? Where is green?' Caleb moved out the day after he turned 18. "I'm glad it went well," I said. "At least no one was yelling." Emmerson kept talking as if I hadn't said anything. Dad and Mom and I talked a lot. I'm not the first gay person in my family. My aunts are lesbians and were some of the first gay people married in Nevada. Mom and Dad only needed time to understand, but they're okay with me being gay. I did talk Dad out of painting a rainbow in my room. I'm not into rainbows. "And Caleb?" I asked. "We haven't spoken in years," Emmerson said. "I'm sure my brother had his wedding in Hawaii, so nobody in our family could afford to come. And, of course, Saturday's reception is at the Regal." Emmerson looked at his hands, then he said, "His new family is very rich and very upper class. Why would they want to have anything to do with us?" I imagined what this kind of betrayal could feel like. Cold and heartless, It would sting clear to the soul. This must hurt a lot, I said, realizing how pointless it sounded as I said it. Suddenly, I was glad I had never told Caleb about me. I was glad that Dad let me talk through my life and feelings with him. Sven might never know how much he had done for me. You can talk to me, I said. Emmerson suddenly blushed and said, It's complicated. You were 16, I was 15, and I wanted to talk to you so bad. Because you were the first guy I crushed on, and when we worked on cars together, even if Dad or Caleb were around, I imagined it was like a date. The other night, when you told us that you were gay, it brought all the feelings back. Emmerson blushed candy apple red. I lifted his stubbled chin so he had to look at me, and gently said, Thank you for last night. It must be torture living with me. Emmerson shrugged and smiled, and this time he leaned in and our lips sandwiched together were warm together, interlocked together, tender and soft together, vulnerable together. Emmerson relaxed into the vulnerability and whispered, I'm not good enough for my brother, but I'm the only person who can help my family. I wrapped an arm around him, pulling him into a cuddle, and whispered back, He's not important anyway. I held Emmerson, feeling the emotion make his body quiver, and then Emmerson whispered, Can I kiss you again? If you don't want to, it's okay. It would be all kinds of awkward because, you were my brother's friend. I can live with awkward, I said, and pressed my lips to his. Our kiss reminded me of my first kiss, tender and nervous and a little sloppy, and it only lasted a few seconds, but it was filled with excitement and anticipation. Why did I kiss Emmerson now? I don't know. Maybe I'll never know. But he's handsome and strong and beautiful, and I love holding this sexy man, and I am a sucker for someone in pain. Maybe I had been lonely for longer than I realized, because my life made it hard to keep someone special in it. Maybe I needed this moment as much as Emmerson did. I kept our kiss short and sweet, and we held hands afterwards, quietly whispering. Emmerson took a deep breath and said, What now? If my nightmares don't scare you away, we see what happens, I said. But we will always have this moment. Later that evening, I received a text from Mom. Their RV had transmission issues, and they'd stopped in Texas to get it fixed. Instead of being here Thursday, like planned, they would arrive on Friday, but the semi-trucks carrying the 555s would get here on Thursday. Dad would need me and the rest of the pit crew to get the bay set up. It meant we'd have to rush practice and prep time at the Vegas Motor Speedway, but it also meant I'd have some time off until they got here. I'd barely reconnected with the Greens, but it would be fun to hang with Emmerson. Would his parents notice if we snuck off somewhere and kissed again? I told Marge that my parents would be here Friday, and she remembered my mom, and invited my parents over for dinner Friday night, the night they got into town. Dad had emailed me some new promo pictures of him and the new 555, and I showed everybody. Just like the earlier versions, it was heavily customized, and it had the rainbow flag sticker on the door. That night, Emmerson and I simply climbed into bed together, and he cuddled me close. The first time the nightmare woke me, he said, "I'm here," and his warm arms held me. I relaxed and went back to sleep. The second time, he held me and whispered, "You're okay," and I went back to sleep. There was no third nightmare. Wednesday morning, Emmerson took time off, and together we visited the desert, a couple of favorite hotels, and even took a ride on the high roller, the giant Ferris wheel on the strip. From 500 feet up, Emmerson and I shared a moment, a kiss, and a smile. And since we were mostly alone, we talked. About cars, about life outside Vegas, about the 555. Emmerson and I were becoming close. Since our first night, something had relaxed between us. When no one was looking, we spent time cuddling on the couch, binge-watching shows, enjoying each other's warmth and companionship. Except for kissing. Sometimes deep kissing. Nothing sexual happened. Often, we talked well into the night, reminiscing about times long gone, or cars, or simply being with each other. At night, Emmerson would curl up behind me and protect me from the nightmares. If I wasn't leaving as soon as Dad's race was done, maybe Emmerson and I could have had something serious. I think we both realized that we had a time limit, so we enjoyed as much of the now as we could. Needless to say, it made our alone moments precious. Thursday morning, I woke after a full night's sleep, comfortable in the warmth of the man sleeping next to me. Emmerson still slept, his face relaxed and innocent. I could fall in love with this gentle man so easily. Emmerson opened his eyes and whispered, "I like waking up looking at you. You didn't have any nightmares last night." I kissed him on the nose and whispered, "You kept them away." He kissed me on the lips. "I better go make coffee," he said. Translation: time to get up before we started doing something he wasn't ready for. I had to smile. Did Emmerson feel about me the way I was starting to feel about him? Later that morning, I waited for the text from the trucks saying they had arrived in Vegas. I had dressed in the casual pit crew t-shirt, a black shirt with the numbers 555 in large white letters on the back, with pit crew in smaller orange letters beneath it. I also had my ID badge on a lanyard around my neck. Emmerson was taking a shower, and I had left a spare pit crew shirt for him on the kitchen table. If we weren't waiting for the phone call, I might have joined Emmerson in the shower. All this free time gave me a moment to think. Caleb wasn't the person I remembered. His God had become wealth and money and prestige. Ashamed and angry of his family for being mechanics, and ashamed of his disabled mother for needing the money reserved for her son's college, I felt an odd sadness. What would Caleb think of me? I was a professional mechanic working in the big leagues, and college was not a priority. Even though I made a really good salary, I wasn't rich. With all Dad's endorsements, he and Mom were rich, but they also spent a fortune on upkeep for the 555s, and it cost a lot to move us around the country. Cars were our life, but they ate all our capital. I didn't like the kind of person Caleb had turned into, but I did like his brother a lot, and his family. I needed to talk to Mom and Dad about this because was it weird to fall in love with the brother of my old friend? Marge had told me to pack a cooler of drinks and sandwiches and snacks for Emmerson and me, because once the pit crew arrived, it would be a busy, non-stop day. I was in the kitchen making peanut butter sandwiches with strawberry jelly. Don't knock it, it's my favorite, and plain cheddar cheese and Canadian bacon sandwiches for Emmerson, with my laptop open to the specs for the new 555 that Dad had emailed me. The shower turned off, and Emmerson yelled, "Have you heard anything yet?" "Nothing yet," I said. "The spare pit crew shirt is out here. You'll need it so nobody hassles you." "Give me 5, Emmerson yelled. "I've made a couple of sandwiches for you," I told him. "Want anything else?" "There's some Coca-Colas in the fridge and some Oreos in the cupboard by the stove," he yelled. "Got it," I said. The doorbell rang. Emmerson yelled from the bedroom, "Dizzy, would you get that? I'm not decent yet." I wiped my hands on a towel and answered the door. A black Rolls-Royce was parked in back of the red truck. The man that stood at the door wore a gray suit with no tie, and I'd have to say his graying hair made him mid to late 60s. After pushing his way inside, he brusquely said, "I'd like to speak with Phil or Marge, please." "They're not here, sir," I said. I didn't know him, but dressed like that, maybe he was Phil's boss? "Do you know where they are?" he asked. He looked around at the low counters and furniture and the wide pathways, at the spare wheelchair parts Phil had been tinkering with. "Marge went to Dollar and Dime earlier," I said. "She works part-time between 10 and 3, and Phil goes into the shop by 6 in the morning, so he won't be home until 4 or 5. Emmerson yelled from the other room, "Dizzy, I forgot to tell you that Dad's going to be late. He had to stop off at Medmart to pick up a replacement footrest for Mom's wheelchair. The old one kept coming loose." "Is that why he kept fiddling with the bolt on it last night?" I asked. "Who are you?" the strange man asked. "Dizzy Johnson," I said. "My boyfriend," Emmerson yelled from the other room. Emmerson walked out from the bedroom, shirtless, his hair damp from the shower. I could seriously appreciate this man. He wasn't built like a model, but rugged and tough, like an outdoorsman. I liked the way he looked, and the way he held me every night, and the way he kissed. A hard-working man with a toned, buff body to prove it. Emmerson had enough sex appeal to excite me. Give this man a couple of years, and he'd be a bear worth catching. Suddenly, I was very glad I had come back to Vegas, and very sorry I had to leave in a few days. "Maybe I can help you. I'm their son, Emmerson, and this is Dizzy, the light of my life. Mom's the one in the wheelchair. The doctors have a weird name for her disease, but it translates into a slow disintegration of her lower vertebrae. They don't have a cure." "I'm Sylvester," he said. I think he expected us to have heard of him, but neither one of us had. I tossed Emmerson the pit crew t-shirt, and he put it on. The shirt was loose on me, but Emerson's chest stretched it to the seams. The man quickly read our shirts and said, "You guys are pit crew for the 555? Sven Johnson's car?" "My dad's the driver," I said. "I'm one of the 5 pit crew mechanics. Dad's racing Sunday. He'll be in town on Friday. But the new 555 and the original 555 are arriving today." "Your dad is Sven Johnson, the NASCAR racer?" the man said. "You've heard of him?" Emmerson asked. Sylvester tweaked a small smile and said, "Saw him race last time he was in Vegas. Was that 2 years ago? I spoke with him for a minute after the race." "Mom came to that one," I said, "but I was back in Miami working on my certification." "Dizzy is Sven's pride and joy," Emmerson said. "You know, Mom and Dad like you. Mom said you can use Caleb's old bed any time you're in town, but maybe we'll trade the 2 smaller beds in for a bigger one. I think Mom suspects." "Great idea," I said as I held Emmerson. Emmerson stepped up to me, lightly kissed me, and said, "I'm glad you're in town." "Me too," I said, and kissed him back. "So, Caleb has a brother?" Sylvester said. "Your boyfriend is the son of Sven Johnson, the NASCAR racer, and your mom is in a wheelchair. These home improvements look pretty recent?" "The summer after my junior year," Emmerson said. "The social workers wouldn't let Mom come home until they were done. We had to get rid of a bunch of stuff so her wheelchair could get around. Dad managed to get a grant for her special car. I think he must have filled out 500 papers." I adjusted the picture on my laptop to show me in the pit crew uniform, my dad and Mom, all standing in front of the 555. "Proof I am who I say," I said. The man looked at it, but his face remained expressionless. "What did you need to see Mom and Dad about?" Emmerson asked. "Homework," Sylvester mumbled. "I have a lot of questions." With a long-suffering sigh, Emmerson said, "Dad's not going to like this. When will we be done with insurance adjusters?" "Emmerson, I have an idea," I said, changing subjects. "Since none of us can afford this Saturday's black tie reception—" "We're not invited anyway," Emmerson said. "I'll talk to Mom and Dad, and why don't we all go out to eat? Mom hasn't seen you guys for ages, and you'd like Dad. He has a million stories about all his races," I said. "Let's have a barbecue out back instead," Emmerson said. "Like Dad always says," I said. "Nothing's better than good food and good times sharing good beer. If it's okay with your folks, I'll invite the rest of the pit crew." Emmerson picked up his phone and said, "I'll call the aunts and tell them, and Uncle Bob and his family." My phone beeped with an incoming text. I quickly read it and then looked up. Emmerson, call your folks while we drive. The 555's just arrived in Vegas and are headed to the Speedway. I'll grab the food, Emmerson said. Sylvester, leave your number and I'll have my parents call you. But Dizzy and I have to go. The Speedway had already assigned us a bay for the 555 to call home. After I introduced everybody to Emmerson, we unloaded the newest 555 and all its gear. One of the senior pit mechanics had been a racer back in the day, and he'd take the new 555 out on a shakedown run. When it came to unload the original 555 and drive it to where it was to be displayed, I turned to Emmerson, tossed him a helmet, and said, "Hop in and buckle up." I don't race, but it is fun to take the old car up to speed, and the Speedway was the perfect place to do it. Right after we drifted the first turn, I had Emmerson screaming for most of the run. I took Emmerson around the track a couple of times, reaching insane speeds. I don't push it. I'm not as crazy as my dad, but he taught me how to drive and drift with the big boys. Once I parked the car for the display, Emmerson and I climbed out, and he hugged me. His adrenaline-fueled kiss surprised me, and when I kissed him back, his surprised look and smile were priceless. The desire in his eyes made my blood pump, especially when he very shyly said, "Can I protect you from your nightmares tonight?" I had a feeling he meant something else. So, my only answer was a kiss. A very long, deep kiss. Early evening, Phil and Marge stopped by the Speedway. Emmerson and I took them on a tour and showed off the new 555 and introduced them to the rest of the pit crew. We conference called with Mom and Dad, planning the barbecue Saturday night. Dad agreed to pitch in for the meat and help barbecue it, and Mom said she'd make her famous potato salad. When Emmerson told Phil about Sylvester, Phil snorted and said, "The only Sylvester I know is Sylvester Marston, the guy who started the Marston brokerage, Caleb's grandfather-in-law. We've never even met, so why would he look us up?" Friday afternoon, we had gotten as much done as we could with Dad still on the road, so the crew found a bar while Emmerson and I went back to the Greens' home. Caleb and Jenny were supposed to be back from their honeymoon today. Even though Marge had left messages for Caleb, he never contacted us. Marge tried to keep a brave face, but everyone saw through it. I think she blamed herself for Caleb's hatred. Emmerson and I were cuddling on the front porch, talking about life, about high school, about cars, when Dad and Mom's big black RV with the numbers 555 on the side pulled onto Collins Street and parked behind the red truck. My folks were here. Dad and I have this little ritual when we haven't seen each other for a while. We are a little crazy. Mom often calls us her twins who never grew up. It all started because we wanted to see who could out-hug the other. Dad climbed out of the RV, saw me, and hunched down. He roared. I jumped off the porch, hunched down, and roared back. Like two sumo wrestlers charging, we roared and lunged at each other. At the last second, we grabbed each other in a bear hug that could shatter ribs. It often scared people because they thought we were about to fight, but it always ended up with laughter and smiles, and every time I loved Dad more. He was willing to be crazy to help me get over missing my dad. I was willing to be crazy because Sven had become my dad. It was our way to show we loved each other. Besides, you have to be a little bit crazy to race cars. "You don't know how much I love you guys," I said, holding my parents tight. Marge, Emmerson, and Phil watched us as if we were aliens from Saturn, and when Dad and I started laughing, they shook their heads knowing we were insane. That night, as we were drinking beers, eating good food, and talking about racing and cars, Phil got a call. When it was over, he looked up and said, "That was Sylvester Marston. He wanted to know if it would be okay if he and his wife crashed our party tomorrow night. He said his wife makes the best apple pie, and I guess she's making 8 pies right now. Bought a ton of Honeycrisp apples from the farmer's market." I told him sure. "Is he bringing Caleb and Jenny?" Marge asked. "Didn't say. Did say he was tired of Caleb's BS and that he has some questions that need a few answers. Saturday, Emmerson had to report to work at the Young Automotive Maintenance Department, where he works as a mechanic while me and the pit crew went to the speedway to finish getting the 555 ready and help Dad make several practice laps. Meanwhile, Mom and Marge and the aunts had a huge gossip session while they got everything ready for the party. Mom can network with anybody, and it wasn't long before her and everybody were best friends. Bob and his family came over about an hour before me and Dad and the pit crew finished up at the track. We were as ready for the race as we could be. When we arrived at the greens, Bob had already started barbecuing. The electric ice cream churners and the crock pots were set up. A cooler filled with a ton of ice and Bud Light and Coca-Cola was on display. Somebody had a stereo playing music from the 1990s. Bob's kids were running around, and when Emmerson saw me, he immediately hunched down, let out a roar as loud as any my dad did, and ran for me. I laughed, hunched down, and roared back. We ended up tackling each other, fell to the ground, laughing and rolling and wrestling. Emmerson ended it with a deep kiss. A really deep kiss. Phil hooted, "That's my boy," and the guys on the pit crew egged us on. When nobody could hear, Emmerson took a deep breath and whispered, "I would like to continue us, even after this weekend. What are you doing about midnight?" He quietly held up a condom. To keep the moment from being completely sane, I kissed Emmerson just as deeply as he kissed me. Just then, a black Rolls-Royce pulled into the drive, carrying Sylvester and an older woman I took for his wife. Emmerson and I helped them with the lattice apple pies. Sylvester smiled, introduced his wife, and said, "Don't tell Caleb, but we're here to get to know the in-laws." Epilogue. 4 years later. We were back in Vegas with a 2-week break between races. Emmerson, my husband, drove our rented BMW, and our 2-year-old son slept in his car seat. My parents were in the rental car behind us. It had been 6 months since Dad's last race in Vegas, but today was kind of a special occasion. This weekend was the last party at the house on Collins Street. Marge's spine had deteriorated again, and Phil and Marge were moving into a wheelchair-accessible retirement community with round-the-care doctors who would be trained on Marge's condition. They had to sell the house, Marge's car, and the red truck to be able to afford the move. Call me crazy, but I bought the red truck at far more than market value. Emmerson was both happy and sad. Happy because his mom would have medical aid close by, and sad because we had had so many good memories of the old house. To help Phil and Marge afford the specialized retirement center, Emmerson and I contributed. With the extra years under my belt, I was making 6 figures. Emmerson had joined the pit crew as well, and we were doing very all right. We weren't the first to arrive. The aunts, Bob and his family, and several family friends were there. Even Sylvester Marston and his wife, now retired. Somehow, they had become family friends and Dad's personal financial advisors. Mine too. I don't mean to brag, but Emmerson and I are worth 7 figures. Mom and Dad are worth 8. Phil and Marge are now completely out of debt and saving a little. Marge, now with mostly gray hair, was wheeling around, giving orders. Her illness had finally slowed her down, except when we placed our son in her lap. She smiled and giggled and threatened to never let our son go. Dad had gone straight for the beer, and he and Phil and Robert and Sylvester were talking about cars, like always. Mom and the aunts and Bob's wife and Sylvester's wife were gossiping while pretending to arrange food. Bob's kids were fighting over some PlayStation game. Marge was in heaven holding her grandson. I hadn't been this happy since our wedding. I looked at all the people around us, and my eyes teared up. Sylvester had mentioned that Caleb and Jenny were doing well, but spent their wealth on expensive trips and toys. With all the family and friends around us, I felt richer. Maybe someday, Caleb and Jenny would realize what they'd cast aside. While Marge cooed over our son, Emmerson and I snuck into our old bedroom. The 2 small beds were long gone, and our bigger bed was there, and about 1,000,000 memories. The old pale yellow shirt I had worn here years ago still hung in the closet. A powerful engine sounded. I looked out the window. A dark gray Maserati Levante Trofeo pulled up. Who would ever drive a $200,000 car on these streets? 2 people in designer clothes got out. After all these years, Caleb and Jenny had arrived. As we walked outside, Phil proudly said, "This is Dizzy and Emerson's son. His name is Sven Lawrence Philip Elizondo Johnson, our first grandson. Can you believe he'll be turning 2 in a month? I can't believe how rich our life has become." Emmerson went to his mom, lightly kissed her on the forehead, and picked up our son. Together, we held him as we went to join our family. I turned to Caleb and said, "Hey, brother-in-law." The stunned look on Caleb's face was hilarious. When I had a nightmare these days, because I still get them, Emmerson was there immediately, holding me until I went back to sleep. I turned to my big bear and softly whispered, "I love you," and we walked over to the cooler and opened a couple of cold ones. The end.